This is the Existential Man Podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping men become the best versions of themselves by focusing on personal growth and other issues that men constantly deal with in today's society. So guys, stay tuned for another great episode of the Existential Man hosted by Matt Volkman.
What is going on, guys? This is Matt with the Existential Man Podcast, and thank you for tuning in. Today is a very special edition, a holiday edition, a Christmas edition of the Existential Man Podcast. We are actually recording this on Christmas Day, and this is an interview that I think is important for every man to have. I'm actually having a conversation sitting down with my father, to try and pick his brain a little bit, try and get to know him a little bit better, maybe address some things, talk about some things that maybe we've either not had the time or taken the time to talk about. Some things I want to learn from him, to maybe help guide me in being a better version of myself, or look at how I come across as a man and as a father and as a husband, and maybe some different perspectives about how I can do things better. And I think this is a conversation that's important for every man to have with his dad. A little bit of background about my dad. He's not actually my biological father. My dad made the choice to be my dad when I was 3 years old, which guides me now as I'm older. Because I recognize the choice and the sacrifice that he made, having made the same choices in my life with my wife's children. And I understand that being a non-biological parent can be difficult, potentially more so than being a biological parent, because you know you have that choice and you know you made that choice. And so to start things off, I just, I wanted to put that out there and clarify that, and also say to you, Dad, thank you for making that choice.
Oh, absolutely.
I appreciate that you did make that choice, and that we have been able to grow and learn, and that I had a positive role model as a father growing up. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So, is there anything you want to add?
Well, I met you, your brother, and your mom all on the same night. So it's not that I was just coming into a relationship with a young lady, but a relationship with a family. And that's what I enjoy about everything that's happened since then.
Good. Yes. It's that's always a factor, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, I won't keep these guys waiting too much longer. But I've got a series of 15 questions, and they're kind of broken down by stages of life. Kind of. But I think in order of importance, as far as getting a little bit of background about you, about some of the things that you experienced growing up, and then some memorable moments with you as a father and a husband, and then eventually towards the future. So first question is, what's your favorite memory from childhood?
Well, there's a lot of them, but I think trying to put my snowsuit on when I was about 4 years old in Michigan, Kalamazoo, Michigan, and all my brothers and I were going to go out and play in the snow before dinner, and it was so hard for me to get my suit on. Everybody was coming in for dinner, and I hadn't got my suit on yet, and my mom let me go out and play, and it just stuck with me for my entire life. It's there, and it's just a fun thing to think back on, because it reminds me of the snow and how far the house was off the road, and being out with my brothers, and just everything about the family all kind of comes back together.
That's cool. She actually let you go back out while everybody else was coming in for dinner?
She did, because I shed a tear or two, or maybe a few hundred. Yeah.
It's amazing how when we're younger, those tears work, and as we get older, they seem to work less and less.
That is true.
Well, that's cool. I don't remember that you ever told me that story.
I don't think you asked me about that before.
Well, yeah,
in that way.
Yeah. So, okay. All right. So this is going to kind of jump a little bit off script, but a memorable moment from your life in general, and how has it affected you?
I was offered a scholarship to go to college, full ride scholarship as a junior in high school. And the whole premise was through the Ford Foundation, they wanted to see if you skipped your senior year, would that make a huge difference? And it did make a huge difference to the point that I neglected to take on the scholarship. I decided to take my senior year, which told them a lot about American males, especially around the time of Vietnam, that I couldn't leave my friends and my relatives. I was too immature, and that's what they were trying to find out, and I helped them find that out.
Well, thank you for playing your part in research.
Well, yeah, I would have liked to have a free college education, all 4 years, full ride, but it was a test, and I've either passed or failed the test, depends on what they were looking for in their search.
So was this an effort for them to learn whether was this like in relation to the Vietnam War and the draft and all that kind of stuff, or was this
nothing to do that? It had to do with could you take a 16 or 17-year-old, skip their last year of high school, and would they be a good candidate to go to college and be a graduate from that college and go on for a full and complete life? Whether it was an educational test or an emotional test, they were looking at, I think, both sides of that coin.
Do you think you matured a lot during your senior year of high school? Or?
Oh yeah, I did. And because I had the test the year before to decide whether I wanted to or not, it made me focus on it a little bit more. And maybe I matured a little bit faster than I would have because I had that little test going into my senior year that was in the back of my mind.
Okay. I don't know. I kind of feel like I don't know if I could have skipped my senior year either, because I feel like there was a lot of things that happened my senior year, at least for me personally. There was a lot of things that happened for my senior year that was like almost like a culmination of a period of my life, and so I can understand that. That makes actually a lot of sense. So.
Yeah, there were a lot of things, the senior prom and the senior picnic and senior cut day and all those things, and all my friends were going to be involved in doing all those things, and I wouldn't have been. Right. I would have been in college, and they wouldn't have been. I would have been a year ahead of them, but it was too much to miss.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And like I said, I was there, and I had I enjoyed high school, and there was just too much. There's too much as almost like writing the final chapter of that, or the final pages of that chapter of in the book of my life. So, okay. Most important lesson you learned from your dad. Could be when you were a kid, could have been when you were an adult, as he was, passing away, those kinds of things.
Well, believe it or not, because you're at the other end of this, patience. To be patient with my kids. My dad was a very stern, tough guy, but also very patient and fair with his 4 boys that he had in 4.5 years. It was a tough thing to bring up, and you got that many little kids running around and going through, grade school, then junior high and high school, and all the testosterone in the family and all the things. And my dad made it all work without us getting the belt, let's say.
Yeah.
It was a lot of stern talking to. And he was just really cool about it. And at the other hand, being real firm, but loving.
All right. And to add to that, what is your favorite memory that you have with your dad?
I guess all the projects we did in the backyard. We would tear up the backyard every summer, and we'd plant dichondra, and the next year we'd tear it up and put down rock, and the next year we'd tear it up and make a concrete patio, and then we'd go to the other part of the yard and do kind of the same thing. And one year we had a guy come in with a backhoe and dug a big old hole in the ground, and my dad and my brothers and I put in a swimming pool, and the only thing that we didn't do was shoot the gunite, which is actually putting the concrete into the walls.
Yeah.
But we built the pump house and the heater house and ran all the lines and all electricity and all those things, and that's why I'm so handy around the house now, because of all the things my dad had me do on the weekends when all my friends were out playing on the street. I was in the backyard working with my dad.
Yeah. And I would venture to say that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously I wasn't there during that period of time, but all the things that, all the services and all the things that people do these days that make life more convenient to offload on somebody else, a lot of those things probably weren't available, or at least not readily and affordably available when you were a kid. And I know that your dad was also in the Army, and I don't know how long he was in the Army, but if he was in the Army during that period of time, I imagine he probably wasn't well off.
That's true. And he was in the CB's construction battalion, which kind of tells you what kind of guy he is.
Yeah.
Basically an engineer. And he was able to do all those projects at our house. And it wasn't just because we couldn't get it done by someone else or it was too expensive. It was that self-fulfilling satisfaction he got that he passed on to me. And that's why I do so many things around my house that I could pay somebody else to do it. And I could go on vacation and have that job done when I got home. But
sure,
I'd rather do it myself.
And I think that's something that I probably learned from you as well. Is like, it's not just with handy projects or construction projects or things of that sort, but just, I like taking something from raw material or just a rough idea through completion and I guess finalization. Like, for me, that's something, it's like there's a sense of accomplishment that comes out of it.
It's kind of like raising children. It's your baby, and then your baby becomes a teenager and then an adult. And the same thing with a project, whether it's building a fence or a swimming pool or whatever you're doing. I like the idea, and I got it from my dad, of you start it and you work your way through it, and it's your baby, man. And when you're done, you have this great sense of accomplishment. You have pride in it that you wouldn't have pride if you paid somebody else to do it. Big
right.
deal.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay. What is something that you had during your childhood that my generation or future generations missed out on or will miss out on?
Neighbors. Too many of us don't play with our neighbors. We don't grow up and play in the street and have stickball and all the other stuff. We have organized sports, but we go to that grassy area, that park, and we meet all the other kids, and we're on a baseball team or a soccer team or whatever team you're on. Well, we did it all in the street with our neighbors, and we got to know all of our neighbor kids, which in turn meant all the neighbors' parents knew each other because our kids were so interactive, and I don't see that as much by a long shot anymore.
Yeah, it's true. And I have to say I'm guilty of that. I don't necessarily want to live in a neighborhood where we're that close to. I mean, I want my kids to be able to grow up with friends. I want my kids to be able to grow up with, being able to play with the neighbors. But at the same time, it's like, I think there's too much. I don't know. I think things have gone the wrong way in terms of people are more antisocial than they used to be. You have to be more cognizant of what you say and how you say it, because you might offend the wrong person. And I maybe to a fault, maybe because mom is this way, but I'm more likely to speak what's on my mind than run it through the filter, which offends people.
And a little sidebar to that whole conversation, I've always told a lot of people that I think air conditioning has hurt the American society.
Really?
Because we always used to go sit on the front porch when it's hot out during the summer, and you'd sit out there and you'd wave at your neighbors, and maybe in the middle of the street have a brew or have a glass of tea, something like that. But everybody comes home from work now, they go in their house, shut the door, and turn the air conditioner on so it's nice and cool, and they don't go back outside, so they don't know their neighbors. And I think it's affected the American personality. Yeah.
I can see that. I can see that kind of how that ties in. I mean, air conditioning is comfortable, especially in the South. Don't get me wrong. It's very comfortable. But I mean, there are parts of me that wishes that we had a better, social interaction with our neighbors.
If you go through the neighborhoods and the older parts of town where the houses were built in the 20s, 30s, 40s, even in the 50s, they all have big front porches that are screened in because that's how they lived the evening time. And the newer homes hardly any of them even have really a front porch.
Right.
They've got a cement stoop at the front door, and that's what they call the front.
Look at ours.
Well,
I mean, our house is not new by any means, but you know, we've got a little, probably 6 foot by 6 foot concrete pad that you walk up to, you ring the doorbell, and you walk in the house. It's not meant for sitting on. It's not meant for congregating on. Whereas, you know, especially, and when I think about it now that you bring it up, it's like when you know, a lot of old farmhouses, you know, the style that seems to be really popular these days. They have those huge, not just central front porches, but a huge wraparound porch that goes halfway around around 2 sides or 3 sides of the house. And I assume that that's probably what they use for their gathering places.
Yeah, and they had the rocking chairs and they had the swings and everything out there. And you could sit down and have a mint julep or whatever you want.
Right.
And yak with your neighbors, yak with your kids, enjoy the weather, maybe see the stars.
Right.
Yeah, those days are past in the United States.
Yeah. Do you think with the resurgence of the popularity of the farmhouse concept that might come back, or do you think that's simply an aesthetic part of?
Yeah. That's just something people like to look at, because let's face it, a lot of people don't even leave their home anymore. They telecommute from their house.
Yeah,
they're not even going to go outside sometimes for days or weeks at a time.
No, don't get me started on that. That's part of the reason why all the housing, the housing market drastic increases, and why you can't find a house to live in if you want to buy a house, and it just everything. I mean, the bubble's got to pop at some time, but that's a whole nother subject for a whole nother day. So, okay. So, kind of talking about, you know, getting to know your neighbors and your friends and playing with the neighborhood kids and stuff like that. I assume you made a lot of friends in your neighborhood.
Oh, yes, I did.
Okay. So tell me about some of the funny and or dumb things that you and your friends did when you were younger.
Well, you know, we had a lot of free time on our hands. Our dads all worked, and a lot of our moms did. It was in that cusp of the time where the women were going to work. So we had a lot of free time, and it was a nice warm area. I lived in California, so a lot of outside time. And, you know, we do crazy things like, you know, one of the neighbor kids needed a haircut, so I decided I could cut his hair, and his sister talked him into it, and he looks like he was butchered by the time we got done with him. His mom came home and just lit up. So he had to go get a haircut that evening down at the barbershop because of what we did. Oh, you know, we broke a lot of windows with baseballs and footballs and things like that. Just stuff that we did. And we tried to run and hide, but our parents always made us go own up to it. Go tell the neighbor you broke the window. It's only a piece of glass. Yeah, sure, Dad. I'm scared.
Yeah.
It turned out that the dad at the other end in the other house was just as cool as my dad.
Yeah. I would say, and I would say that I think that aspect is probably missing today too. You know, for those that do have kids that play outside, I think that there's a whole lot of finger pointing and a lot less understanding of just being a kid and life and things happening.
Yeah, a lot of adults have grown up and they forgot that they were children, and they did things not totally kosher all the time themselves. They did things in their neighborhood, but they forget about those when they're looking at your kids, or when you guys were little, my kids, and they just forget that they were children at one time too.
Yeah. Yeah. Was there anything that you did as a kid that you regret doing? Like a decision that you made that maybe affected you longer than, you know, like long term, like a something like that?
I don't think really, nothing long term. Some short term things that taught me lessons. I can remember going to the local grocery store after school, and it was really cool. They had these nice padlocks, and I would like to have one for my bike, so I borrowed it, so to speak. And on the way out of the store, the manager caught me. I got taken into the break room, security room, whatever they called it. But they let me go. They didn't do a thing. I had to go home and tell my parents, and they were going to call my parents the next day and see how things went.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the toughest thing I remember doing as a child, is going home to tell my parents that I stole something down at that store and ask them for forgiveness. It was hard. And I still remember it as if it happened yesterday.
Well, probably a little bit of forced integrity. But do you think integrity is a value that's gone by the wayside in today's society?
Well,
on a grander scale.
Yeah, to some degree. I just don't think, how do I put it? We're not giving people an opportunity to let their integrity shine. I don't know.
So you think it's more, there's too much babysitting as a kind of a catch-all phrase, as opposed to allowing people to make decisions and deal with the consequences. Whatever.
And that'd be a good way of putting it. It's like the kid that gets in trouble at school, and they call the parents down to the school, and the parent takes on the teacher or the counselor or the principal as if they were wrong and their child is perfect and doesn't do any of those things.
Yeah.
It's too much scapegoating by the parents on behalf of their children, instead of having their children stand up and be noticed and take the fire.
Yeah. I know this is kind of a tough subject and something that we've talked about in the last couple of days with the school shooting in Michigan. Yeah. And how the parents are kind of being forced to take responsibility for their poor decisions. But it's, I can't help but think that has a lot to do with why there's increases in school violence. Do you think so? Okay. So, and getting kind of going along the same lines, things were obviously different when you were a kid versus when I was a kid, and even drastically different now with my children than when I was a kid. Like, do you feel like it was a lot more acceptable when you were growing up to just be a boy, and all the things that kind of came along with being a boy, the rough housing, the rowdiness, the poor and short attention spans, the outbursts, and the coming to fisticuffs where boys settled their differences? Do you think it was a lot more acceptable then than it is now? And do you think that has caused maybe some detriment to the growth and maturity of today's boys as opposed to when you were a kid?
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I can remember my brother and I, getting in a fight in the garage, and I made one too many swings. He raised his arm. My arm went across his. I broke my arm. And,
I remember you telling me that story.
That was not a fun thing. But in today's world, I think if you took your child to the doctor's office with a broken arm, the first thing they're going to do is get Department of Social Services involved, as if you've been beating your child. And I think the kids know that, and they take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Hold it against their parents, so to speak.
But also in schools, though, too. Like, because I know in our school, there's zero tolerance, in the school that the kids go to, it's zero tolerance. Any type of violence or, disruptive behavior. And I know that didn't, you got in trouble if you got in a fight in school. There's no question about it, but it wasn't like you were suspended for 5 days and couldn't come back and, all those kinds of things, or potentially expelled. Because I know that there are some school districts where if you get in a physical altercation with another student, you're expelled. And I think that, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is my personally held belief. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel like there's certain aspects of boys that is ingrained by nature as opposed to how they're raised. And it's no different to me than watching dogs or wolves or any other, relatively aggressive animal fight for their place in the pack. And I think that not allowing boys to figure that out on a purely biological, naturistic sense creates this air of almost like incontent within boys as a group.
It's kind of heavy.
You think so?
But I do remember in the 8th grade, got in a little scrap during PE with another kid, and it got to the point where after school we were going to have it out. And even though I was very non-combative, very, as you know, a pacifist, I felt obligated after school to meet this kid at the bridge and have it out. And I didn't want to, but because the crowd pushed me, and it was the manly thing to do in the 8th grade, I went ahead and had a fight with this kid after school at the bridge.
Yeah.
Nobody won. We both lost, but I felt obligated as a boy in the 8th grade I had to do that because that's what everybody expected. I was going to meet this kid after school, and we were going to have it out.
Okay. So you felt like even then in society as it was back then, you felt obligated to do something that you didn't want to do simply because that's what the greater majority of people expected you to do.
That's right. I was expected to fight after school, and I didn't want to, but I was expected to, and that pressure got to me, so I went to the fight.
Okay. Out of curiosity, why didn't you want to?
I've always been that way. I don't want to hurt anyone. It's
right.
like, that I don't fish with live bait because I don't want to put a hook into a worm. That's why I'm a fly fisherman.
Yeah.
I don't use live bait. It's something about it. I can't do that. It's how I'm made up.
Yeah. And I think fly fishing takes more skill anyway. So, kudos to that. But okay. Well, hey, look, I mean, like I said, my personal view was that I think to some extent, the natural selection that comes into play between boys and men when they're kids doesn't happen anymore. And so people, I think on some level, boys lose a little bit of a sense of identity and where they fit in by not being able to hash those things out. I don't know.
They're to a large degree pampered by society.
I agree.
That's the whole thing. Let them go out there, be rough and tumble, get dirty, chip a tooth, break an arm, cut an elbow. It's all part of the process of growing up and becoming what you're going to be as an adult male.
Yeah. So, all right, moving on to kind of your role as a father. Do you feel intimidated by how cool your kids are?
My kids are not cool.
Hey, come on, man.
They may think they are, but they're not cool. I'm really believe, and time will tell, play this out, but I think they're all well-adjusted adults, and I think that myself and their mom have done a good job and brought you and your brothers and your sisters up to be just human beings and caring, and you're not cool, you're just good.
Oh, cool. Thank you. I happen to think I'm cool, but I mean, that's I'm kidding. But all right, so obviously you've watched us all grow up. You've watched us kind of go from babies needing to adults deserving and earning. Like, what surprises you most about your kids in general?
That's a pretty tough question. I guess the fact that you guys all seem to be level-headed, for the most part, definitely caring adults. All but one of the kids has children, and his choice and his wife's choice not to have children. That's certainly up to them. I got married a little bit later in life, and it was maybe too late. But everyone's done a good job as a parent, and good jobs as spouses. I don't know. It's just, you feel really good when you see that your children have succeeded, and to some degree, at a larger, higher level than what I have. So it's nice to pass that on.
Well, all right. And on a more personal note, you know, I know we've addressed the fact that I was not something that happened to you, but I, as a person or as a child, but I was a choice that you made. What surprises you most about me as a grown adult male?
Well, I guess the whole thing is we're just father and son. It's not like stepdad or foster dad. I'm your dad, and we've treated each other exactly that way as biological father and son. And it's just so natural. I will say this, I feel a little more obligated to you and your next oldest brother because I made the choice to take care of you guys and be your dad. I want to make sure that my choice pans out for the best for you guys.
Well, I mean, do you feel like on some level that your job is done? I mean, at this point in your,
I'm still alive. It's not done.
Well, no, I understand that, but I mean, like the time of you, how do I say this? I'm not trying to say that your influence is not important and that your thoughts are not valid, but I mean, your time to really kind of mold us and shape us into what you believe a good human being and a good, solid, strong adult should be, contributing member of society. A lot of that time is pretty much over. Do you?
Yeah, I would say a lot of my teaching time is over, and now it's more enjoyment time.
Well, I actually would disagree that a lot of your teaching time is over.
Well, compared to when you guys were young.
Right,
it was it was teaching minute to minute. Now it's once a month, twice a year, whatever it might need.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
But I mean, obviously you've got quite a bit of life experience to be able to share with us, and you've gone through some things in your life that, you wouldn't want your kids to go through. I wouldn't want my kids to go through. And so your guidance is still important and it's still needed. And I think anybody who's lost their father, even at an older age, would probably agree with the statement that they still wish they had their dad around, because their dad's wisdom, and I think this is even more true for males than females, is I think that even as we as men get older, as husbands and fathers, we still look to our dad for wisdom and guidance. And so I would say that your teaching time and your guidance time is far from over. And that's part of the reason why I'm having this conversation with you today. But for me, it's important to not only have this conversation, but to share some of the topics of conversation and maybe help other men that listen to this podcast or women. I mean, if they, I think it's important for women to have a conversation with their dad too. But I think it's really important for guys to take the time to have some of these conversations and talk about things that maybe them and their dads have not had the opportunity or not taken the time to do that. But on top of that, for me, the subtext to this is I want to have something that as my kids get older, and maybe even my grandkids, they can actually hear some of these lessons, some of this wisdom, some of this guidance from their grandpa's and their great grandpa's own words. Not something that's passed down from generation to generation. As valuable as those stories and lessons might be, I think it's important for them to hear them come directly from you. I
agree. Well, my dad's been gone close to 30 years, and there are still a few times, maybe once a month, once every couple months, where I wish I could have talked to him and asked him a question and got his insight.
Yeah.
As you know, a son wants their dad's insight, whether we follow it or not.
Right.
We ask for it, but it's just a good sounding board.
Right. And I, you and I have had conversations going back. I mean, on some heavy and deep topics, from the time that I was young, by young, I mean like early 20s, late teens, early 20s, dealing with some really heavy adult shit that I I'd never been through it before, and I think, there is no manual for being a husband or being a father. And so the manual that we look to is that of our fathers, because they have the experience. They've been through it. Chances are, if we're encountering it, they've dealt with it before. Good?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyways, I don't know. I kind of touched on that and then went off on a tangent. So, but anyways, we'll get back to this, but kind of speaking on that too, like, kind of going back to when I was younger and some of the things that I've come to you about for advice or issues that I've had or problems that I've addressed with you. It's like, what is the biggest positive change you've seen in me over the years?
I think when you made the decision to go in the Army, that was a very adult decision that had a consequence that you had to live with, whether you wanted to or not, for somewhere between 4 and 8 years to start with.
Yeah.
You couldn't just say, I changed my mind after basic training. Well, I want to go home now.
Yeah.
It was a decision you had to make, and you stuck with it. And I'm proud of you because of that. You wanted to stick with it further, but due to injury, you couldn't be a soldier anymore.
Yeah.
But the fact that you did that and you made that commitment and you did everything in your power until you had a physical issue, you were committed to do it. And I think that you should be proud of yourself.
I am proud of myself, but I appreciate the fact that you recognize that. And I knew going in, I'd done a lot of research because I enlisted. I didn't enlist fresh out of high school. I enlisted, obviously later on in life.
Married with children.
Yeah. Married with children, which adds a whole nother bit of complexity to the issue. Because it's not just me I got to think about now, it's them and how it's going to affect their life for the coming time. But yeah, it was definitely an adjustment. And I think it was not the hardest decision I ever had to make, because in the long run, it ended up turning out for the best, but it was up there. And at the time in my life, that was one of the hardest decisions I have ever had to make in my life. For a multitude of reasons, least of which was, leaving behind everything that I had ever known. Even though I was married with kids, we had our own house. It was like, we still lived near, and we were able to build and foster that relationship. And I know that, working together, sometimes our relationship was not always solid. And I think that was a lot of the impetus for me was, and I don't know if I've ever told you this before, but a lot of the impetus for me was like, if I don't leave, my relationship with my dad will not be repairable. And that's whether it would have been or wouldn't have been, I can't say for sure, but that's how I felt at the time. And it wasn't worth it to me to stick around and have that be the result. I would have rather had a relationship with you and been hundreds of miles away than, stay there working for you and end up resenting you, or you resenting me for how things went down with the business and working together. And it just, I don't know. It was just more important for me to do that. So, but, all right. In what ways do you feel I am most like you?
Well, you're a good dad. You pay attention to your kids. You definitely, I wouldn't say control them, but you're making sure that they're being brought up properly without being crazy about it, without timeouts and spankings daily, things like that. Just talking to your kids, trying to be calm, cool, and collected about it, and help them make good decisions. And that's a good thing. It's a hard thing to do, because when you're a dad and you've got all the pressures of to a large degree, you're the breadwinner, and you've got all these other pressures. You got to make sure the house payments are made and the utilities are paid, and you got enough money when you go to the grocery store, and you have to raise children. It makes it harder when you're just dealing with the kids.
Yeah.
And you just do a really good, solid job of that, and it shows by how great your kids are.
Thank you. I try. I mean, we've talked about this too. It's important for my kids to grow up to be positive contributions to society, and to be good human beings, respecting
is
those around them as well, and as well as themselves. Like, that's another thing too, is I think that, there's this whole saying, respect is given, or respect is earned, not given. But I'm the type of person who's like, I'm going to give you respect until you give me a reason to not give you respect. Mm-hmm. But I do expect the same in return. I'm trying to teach my kids the same way, because a lot of people don't see it the same way. But if you constantly wait for somebody to earn respect, you got to give them enough respect to give them the opportunity to earn the respect to begin with. So on some level, there's got to be some give and take. And so being respectful of others, being respectful of themselves, being respectful of their surroundings are all things that I want, and they're things that I learned from you and Mom, lessons that you guys taught us, lessons that activities and organizations that you got us involved in, Boy Scouts. Those are things like, these are all lessons that I learned throughout my lifetime through the lessons that you guys taught me, that I think it's important to pass on to them. And I think there's so little of that these days. Self-respect, personal accountability, which is another thing. And it's hard for kids their age to really grasp that concept fully, but I'm trying to kind of mold that into who they are, so that as they get older, they start to understand, okay, I messed up. Now I got to deal with the shitty consequences of that. I'm going to avoid doing what it was in next time or I'm going to change what I did to avoid that next time. So, and I appreciate the fact that you respect, or that you see that in me. So looking back on see here, I'm 37. We met when I was 3. So on our 34 years, what is your most prized memory in our relationship as father and son?
Well, that's a lot to think about. I
didn't say the questions were going to be easy.
A real quick, 20-second question that has to cover 30, 35 years.
Is there any one that like sticks out in your mind as far as like the way that it made you feel, or like you were just so full of pride, or maybe?
Yes, I'll give you one that's really high on the list. Is when you graduated from jump school, and I was able to come out there and pin your wings on you, even though I didn't get to do the blood thing, because they don't allow that anymore. But,
yeah.
To put your wings on you. And that was really cool as a dad to know that his son actually did what he did, and he graduated, and he's going to be jumping out of airplanes.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but jumping out of airplanes.
Well, I don't know why I thought that would be one that you, like one of the couple that you would pick, but I had a feeling that was high up there, and it's one of my most prized memories as well. So I'm glad that we shared that together. Yeah. Speaking of memories with your parents, and kind of conversations along this line, is there anything that you wish you had asked your parents or your dad, but you didn't, either by choice or just due to circumstances and not being able to?
I wanted to know more about his experience at Pearl Harbor. Guys at World War II came back home. They didn't talk a lot about it. And they weren't put under somebody's thumb like a lot of the guys from Vietnam and from the Middle East. it was all open in society and everybody was proud of them, but a lot of them didn't talk about it much. And I just wish I would have sat down and talked to my dad more about his experience, not just in the Army during World War II, but in particular at Pearl Harbor the day it was bombed, because he was there, and I want to know as much as I could so I could experience it through him.
Yeah. Do you think that do you think there were reasons why he didn't ever talk about it with you guys openly?
I just think that's the way it was. The guys in those years in the early 40s, they went to war and for their country and for their families, and then they come home and they continued with their families.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a lot of need to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I don't know I wouldn't say they weren't proud of it, but they also weren't going to embellish it and make a big deal about it. It's just something that they did.
Yeah.
They went out and they did it.
Yeah. And I think there's probably, well, I don't know. There's part of the reason why they called them the last great generation or the greatest generation or whatever was they went out and did what they had to do. And that was it.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no questioning. There was no whining and, you know, all things that I've been guilty of, I know, but it is what it is. I mean, it's, you know, and I think, I don't know. I wish I would have been able to sit down with Grandpa Jack and talk to him about some of that stuff, especially now after my experiences with, you know, Army, serving, working in the special operations community, doing some of the stuff that I did, going to war, you know, all those. I would like to know kind of what he did. How did he deal with some of the things that he saw and experienced? Not just for me, but for people that I know that probably went through way worse things than I did that may be able to benefit from something like that.
I just don't know how a lot of those guys dealt with that. You get up at 5:45 on a Sunday morning and all hell's broke loose and they're looking around and it's just death and chaos everywhere.
Right.
And you know that you could be the next one in the next second, and somehow they all made it through, and then they went to other theaters of the European area for the war and down the South Pacific, and then they all came home and they just kind of picked up their normal life and went on.
Right. Man, I guess they were just a lot better at compartmentalization than our generations today. Yeah. That's the only thing I could think of.
And maybe they didn't take as much into battle with them as we may, because we know so much about the world now because of our communication abilities that within seconds we can pass a story around the world in seconds. They
information
didn't have all that
is instantaneous, right?
It was more compartmentalized, and so they only had their little part of the world to deal with.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that does make sense. You know, I mean, it's like news did not travel at the speed that it does today. So if there was something, you know, it's like, you know, something's going on at home, they're not going to know about it for days, weeks, months. It's not going to be, you know, a 2-minute phone call over the internet to get bad news or good news or whatever. So that might have had something to do with it. It was just less of a mental burden. And
maybe because of the disconnect of communication, they didn't think about it minute to minute, day to day.
Right.
When they were in combat or a combat zone, they sometime in the next month or two, they would communicate with somebody they knew. They didn't have to do it every single day or have the opportunity to do it every single day. So it wasn't that big of a deal. They were just over there doing their job.
Yeah. And do you think, I also kind of thinking back a little bit about early in our conversation where you were talking about like the sense of community in neighborhoods and stuff like that seems to be gone. People's ability to have interpersonal communications seems to be significantly decreased from what it was back then, simply out of necessity back then versus convenience now. I would venture to say that there was probably a lot more trust and relationship building amongst service members back then than there is today.
Yeah, and maybe they came home from the war and they came back to their community, and their community they were all out there on the front porch to welcome you back.
Right.
And you got to be back with your close members of your community just like that. Well, nowadays you can have a neighbor come home from Afghanistan and you don't even know it.
Yeah. You just know that his car's back after 6 months.
And well, it's moved anyway because it was sitting still in a driveway. Now it gets moved every day. Go, hey, Joe must be back from overseas.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, man. Different times. All right. Well, is there anything you've wanted to tell us as your kids, but you haven't yet, or haven't taken the time, or?
No more Hawaiian shirts.
You've got enough.
I hit around 70 or so here recently. So yeah, I've got enough. I'm start weeding them out.
All right. So what should be the default gift from here on out? Because notice we didn't get you one today for Christmas because
no gift. I told you that, and I told your wife that. Yeah, we just want everyone in the family to be happy and get along. And that's a gift.
Yeah.
That you can't buy.
Yeah, it's true. Very true. This one might be a tough one. Is there anything in particular, or are there things that you look back on that you wish you would have done differently as a father?
Oh, maybe wouldn't have been as hard on the kids as I was occasionally, but I don't know if I hadn't have been the way I was in certain times when I was very stern, if you guys all wouldn't have come out the way you have. So maybe I felt like I was a little too stern at times, but it may have been part of the necessity. I don't know, and I probably never will know.
Yeah. I know that there were times where, I just me personally speaking, like I know that there were times where I've felt that if it weren't for things that I wasn't doing right, that I wouldn't get any kind of feedback at all. But then there's times where, you celebrated my high moments as well, that it had nothing to do with anything negative. And I have to say, I worry a little bit about that too with my own kids, because there are times where I feel like I come across as a little bit too over the top. But then there's a part of me that's like, you know what? If I come across a little over the top now, this may be something that I don't have to deal with again down the road, that they'll get the message because of how, hard I'm coming across now as far as this behavior is not acceptable.
And I noticed that with my dad. He was pretty stern, more so than I am. But I noticed that growing up, he was my dad. He was the enforcer in the family, all those things. And when I got into my early to middle 20s, he was no longer my dad, so to speak. He was my friend.
Yeah.
I grew into that relationship because of how he brought me up.
Yeah. And I think it's easier to do that when you can understand some of the reasons behind some of the things that occurred. But part of that is communication and talking about it. So I don't know. Okay. We are coming close to the end. I only have a couple more questions. Romantic advice. Any romantic advice that you want to pass on to me? Things that you've experienced in your, decades of marriage, or
just remember those magic words.
What's that?
Yes, dear.
It's funny. It's funny because I had a conversation with an author, Jack Kammer, last episode and the episode before that. And he said that for some men, that's the kiss of death.
I don't believe that. That's that.
Do you think it's healthy to be conflict averse in a marriage though? Or do you think conflict is necessary on some level?
Well, I don't know that it's necessary. It's going to happen. Recognize the fact that it will happen. You're going to have some of it. Deal with it and get over with it and move on. So you're going to have some conflicts.
Yeah.
You can't have life without conflict. But make it quick, sweet and short, and remember yesteryear.
Yeah. Do you think it's important to have some kind of conflict, disagreement in relationships?
Yeah, I would say probably. Yeah, just if for no other
For a
reason.
healthy relationship,
Yeah,
I mean.
so you can understand more about where the other person's thinking is, where they're coming from. Because if they're always just totally agreeable, you don't know if they're really agreeable or not. You have to find out where their limits are,
Right?
And how do you push them over that limit? Not that you want to, but you know you're going to from time to time.
Yeah.
So then you can step back to what's a comfortable zone for both of you.
Kind of like finding where that boundary is and making sure that the healthy boundaries are established.
Right.
Okay. And that makes sense. That makes sense. So don't be conflict averse, but don't go looking for it either.
And just as a guy, just remember, if you want to say, yes, dear, it's not an ego thing. It's just putting things in perspective.
Right.
You know,
there are a whole lot worse things out there than being agreeable. There's a whole lot more negative that could come, or that there's a whole lot more positive that can come from it than negative. I get what you're saying.
it cannot hurt you.
Right. Okay. Last two questions, and they're probably going to make you think. What?
Okay.
Short? Too short for you?
No, I'm pretty done.
Okay. How would you like to be remembered by my children and my grandchildren?
Loving and sort of funny. I want them to smile and laugh when they think of me.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I'm always poking at them and tickling them and making funny things and funny sayings to make them laugh, because I'm hoping that when I'm gone, that they'll think of me and they'll think of those times and they'll laugh.
I think that I think you're doing a pretty good job. From what I can see with my kids, I think you're doing a pretty good job of that. I think my kids are definitely going to have positive memories of Grandpa. So,
well, thank you.
And I hope that they pass that along to their children about, well, when my grandpa was always messing around with us and playing jokes and pranks and doing all these kinds of crazy things. And so, okay, very last question. And I guess what I'm looking for on this one is something deep and lasting, because this is kind of, this is the coup d'etat, or the capstone on this interview is in this conversation is like, what do you hope your legacy for all your future generations will be? Your future generations, not the world, but people that are descendants of you, Harry.
I just go back to church and just say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Okay.
It's short, sweet, and says a lot.
Okay. All right. So treat others as you want to be treated.
Yeah. I mean, really. I mean, not just, it's not a saying. It's not cheap language.
Right.
Really, from the heart, do it.
Okay. Well, thanks for sitting down with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I mean, it's, when I thought about the concept of focusing on family, especially around the holidays and today being Christmas, I kind of was like, I think it would be good to have a conversation and get insight from you as my dad, on certain things, aspects of, being a man, being a father, being a husband, kind of getting to know you a little bit better. And it's been enjoyable. I've enjoyed getting to hear some of the stories that maybe I didn't hear all the details on, or any of the details on when I was a kid. But yeah, and hopefully you guys out there listening can get some at least inspiration, if nothing else, to go have a conversation like this with your own dad. And maybe, for those of you that don't have a positive relationship with your dad, now's the time to start, guys. It's the holidays. It's time to start thinking about families and really what's important. We're not put on earth here forever, and we don't have infinite amounts of time to be what we are. And, one thing that I wish I could pass along and really, really get into some of you guys that are out there listening is the concept of forgiveness. And I know this is kind of cliche because it is Christmas time and because it is the holidays, but the reality is this: forgiveness is not a gift you give somebody else. Forgiveness is the greatest gift you can give yourself. The minute you forgive somebody else, It's not about forgetting what they did. It's about forgiving them their misgivings against you so that you can let some of that angst and some of that discontent towards that person go. And it's even more important when it comes to family, especially parents, brothers and sisters, your immediate family members. You know, I realize that not everybody out there has a positive family and or has people that they feel like they can go to and approach and have those familial relationships with. But there's no time like the present to make that happen, because ultimately, you know, we've talked about some things in relation to war and military and some of those other concepts. But even those things aside, tomorrow is not given, is not a guarantee. There is no promise that you will wake up tomorrow morning from sleeping tonight, or that you even wake up the same person. Interesting, crazy things have happened. And guys, I'm not trying to go off on a tangent here. I just really want you to understand that family really is important, and taking the time to try and heal some of those relationships. If they're broken or they're fractured or they're stressed, heal those relationships. It's only going to make you better in the long run. So guys, this is Matt with The Existential Man. Again, I want to thank my dad for coming on, Harry Volkman. I appreciate his time and sitting down with me. And I think it's been really beneficial for me as a man to kind of sit down and talk to my dad about it. Guys, thank you very much for tuning in to The Existential Man for this very special holiday Christmas edition. I hope you guys have a fantastic holiday season, a very Merry Christmas to you and your families, and we will catch you guys on the next episode. Take care. We're out.